I am Stanley Tookie Williams III, born on December 29, 1953, in Shreveport, Louisiana. My father left us when I was just one, and my mother, Louisiana Williams, moved us to Los Angeles in 1959. Life in South Central wasn't easy. Mom worked hard, but I often roamed the streets, getting into mischief and earning a few bucks from hustlers. As a latchkey kid, I witnessed the rough side of life early on. Street fights, dogfights, and odd jobs for money became a norm. By my teenage years, I was known for my street fighting skills. Expelled from school and denied entry elsewhere for being intimidating, I landed in Juvenile Hall a couple of times. It was there, in 1969, that I discovered weightlifting, sparking an interest in bodybuilding. This newfound passion gave me direction and discipline, but it didn't erase the allure of the streets. After my release in early 1971, I was approached by Raymond Washington, who proposed forming the Crips to protect our neighborhoods. Initially, I aimed to unite gangs against common threats, but ended up contributing to the violence we sought to combat. The late 60s and early 70s were tumultuous times in South Central. The Black Power movement was in full swing, and with the disbandment of older gangs, youth gangs proliferated. While initially despising these predatory gangs, I soon found myself at the helm of one. At 17, I emerged from juvenile detention physically stronger and mentally determined. Washington's vision resonated with me, and together, we laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most infamous gangs in American history. The West Side Crips, led by yours truly, quickly gained notoriety for our aggressive recruitment and ruthless tactics. Our clashes with rival gangs escalated, and South Central became a battleground. But amidst the chaos, there was a semblance of purpose. We saw ourselves as protectors of our communities, fighting against racism, corruption, and police brutality. However, our methods often contradicted our intentions. Random acts of violence became commonplace, instilling fear not just in rival gang members, but also in innocent civilians. My reputation grew, and so did the Crips' influence. But with power came consequences. In 1979, I was arrested for the murder of 4 people during 2 robberies. Convicted in 1981, I was sentenced to death. My appeals for clemency sparked debates on the death penalty, but ultimately, on December 13, 2005, I was executed by lethal injection. My life was a series of contradictions, a mix of good intentions, misguided actions, and the harsh realities of life in South Central. I may be remembered as a co-founder of the Crips, but my legacy is far more complex than that. Stanley Tookie Williams found himself thrust into a position of leadership within the Crips after the incarceration and subsequent murders of other key figures. His double life, working as an anti-gang youth counselor by day and leading one of Los Angeles' largest gangs by night, epitomized the complexities of his existence. Despite his efforts to steer young people away from gangs, Williams found himself entrenched in a cycle of violence and drug abuse. In 1976, Williams survived a drive-by shooting but was left wounded, told he'd never walk again. Yet, through sheer determination and a rigorous rehabilitation regimen, he defied the odds and regained his mobility.
Duke was born on December 29, 1953 in Louisiana. Some years later, Tookie and his mother would move to Los Angeles on the west side of South Central, to be exact. Tookie's early childhood in South Central. Growing up, Tookie would see a lot and experience a lot of things. Seeing a lot of drinking, drug use, addiction, gambling, and a lot of violence. Tookie having a lot of free time with his mom, working several jobs to support the family, and working long hours, Tookie would start to participate in things going on in his neighborhood in his early teenage years that included robbing, fighting, and anything to get some money. This would make him become tough and a good fighter, and becoming a part of a dangerous lifestyle. Around the mid and late 1960s was on the rise in urban communities, and many small neighborhood gangs would pop up. In the United States, the biggest movement for the African Americans would form in the 60s, and that would be the Black Panthers. They would become well established by the 60s and the early 70s, becoming a powerful movement. giving African Americans structure and a sense of power and identity. The Black Panthers started branches all over America, and Los Angeles would have its own branch as well. This will have a heavy influence on the youth in LA, making them move militant and follow the wave of the Panthers. But the Panthers movement dying out, with many leaders being killed, jailed, and some becoming addicts or just fading away from the man, bringing them down. As a whole, the youth of LA will form several youth gangs and their own. By 1969, the formation of the Crips was started in LA. By this time, Tookie in the late 1960s would begin to make a name for himself in the streets. Tookie developed a big following on the west side of South Central. In the late 1960s, Tookie ran with other featured Crips like Dawn of Archie, Bub, Mad Dog, and a long list of other future famous Crips. Running with a dangerous crowd and being one of the most violent out his few, Tookie would get into a lot of trouble, from getting into non-stop fights, being kicked out of school. Tookie would have several stints in Juvenile Hall from fighting or stealing cars as well. In jail, Tookie began to lift weights, and this made him more stronger physically and mentally. But to other people, this made him wildly more feared. With his new size, many people would fear Tookie and wants no parts of him. Upon being released from jail, Tookie would meet another major figure, but from the east side of South Central, named Raymond Washington. Raymond Washington is credited to starting the Crips in his early teenage years. Upon this meeting, Tookie and Raymond, who were both leaders at their sides of town, would bring the Crips factions together and make their crew as allies. The East Side Crips, headed by Raymond Washington, and the West Side Crips, led by figures like Tookie, the Crips would gain more and more followers. Crips would start to recruit new members all over LA. This would bring more Crip members and new gangs. They would start to expand from South Central to other nearby cities like Compton, Watts, Gardena, and several more. But many gangs wouldn't join the Crips, and they would become fierce rivals. Some of the Crips' early rivals were gangs like the Chain Gang, the Brims, and the Compton Pa Rouge, with Mac Thomas being the leader in Compton for the Crips. The blue rag was said to first be worn by a close friend of Tookie's named Buddha. With Buddha dying by 1973, it was said that Crips wore the blue rag in his honor. By 1974, Raymond Washington was sent to prison for a 5-year bid. Tookie later moved to Compton, where he became a youth counselor, being like a big brother to several young Crips and an authority figure. While living in Compton, Tookie would be shot by rivals, causing him to need physical therapy. This would cause Tookie to develop a drug addiction to ease his pain. This would cause his life to later spiral, especially with personal reasons like the loss of his grandma, losing his counselor job, and not being able to do what he loved, bodybuilding. He loved being in bodybuilding competitions, but with his well-known reputation as a gang member, he wasn't allowed to. Tookie would die deeper in the streets and in his addiction.
However, this brush with death marked a turning point. Williams spiraled into substance abuse, particularly PCP, exacerbating his already tumultuous lifestyle. Personal tragedies compounded his struggles. The death of his maternal grandmother in 1976 deeply affected him. His employment as a counselor ended in 1977 due to his alleged involvement in a robbery, further destabilizing his life. Denied participation in a bodybuilding contest due to his gang affiliations, Williams faced rejection and disillusionment. His mental health deteriorated, culminating in a hospitalization after a bad PCP trip. With setbacks mounting, Williams turned to crime to support his drug habit, resorting to intimidation and robbery. His involvement in violent attacks against drug dealers underscored the depths of his descent into criminality. In 1981, Williams faced trial for 4 murders committed during 2 separate incidents. Despite maintaining his innocence, he was convicted and sentenced to death. Allegations of prosecutorial misconduct and a biased jury selection process cast doubt on the fairness of his trial. However, subsequent reviews found no compelling reason for a retrial. Critics questioned Williams' sincerity in renouncing gangs, pointing to his continued association with Crips members in prison. Nonetheless, supporters highlighted his efforts at redemption and his significant contributions to anti-gang initiatives. The debate surrounding his guilt, the fairness of his trial, and the effectiveness of his rehabilitation efforts fueled public discourse on the criminal justice system and the death penalty. Throughout his incarceration, Williams grappled with violence and adversity, enduring assaults and injuries. Despite his struggles, he maintained a semblance of stability, with no violations reported since the late 1980s. Yet, in 1988, he faced another harrowing ordeal when he was stabbed in the neck by another inmate, further underscoring the dangers of prison life. Stanley Tookie Williams' life epitomized the complexities of the human experience, marked by triumphs and tragedies, redemption and remorse. His legacy remains the subject of debate, reflecting broader societal questions about crime, punishment, and rehabilitation.
In 1979, many Crips would lose their lives and many would start to go to prison. Crip leaders like Raymond Washington and Mac Thomas lost their lives. During this time period, a lot of new Crip gangs would be established with the lack of leadership and not having the unity it once was in the early 70s. With this happening, many Crip sets would become rivals and start new alliances. Under the Crip call, by 1981, Tookie would be convicted of several robberies which ended in many people losing their lives. It is said that Tookie held up a 711, taking the life of a clerk inside the store. The second crime he committed, it was said that Tookie held up a motel, taking money from the register and taking 3 lives. This would get Tookie the death penalty. Tookie would always claim his innocence, stating that the police framed him because